All right, so I had every intention of making this like a super polished, put together video with a script, but I just like got a text message from my very best friend who is also a psychologist, also somebody really passionate about some of the issues that I'm passionate about. And I'm not going to name her. She knows who she is, but she just sent me a text message. And we've had this conversation before where she asked me, and I quote, any tips for when compassion fatigue creeps into regular life? And my response to her was, what does your therapist say? And her response was, I got to find a therapist. So there's this stigma around therapists being in therapy. I welcome you to check out my blog where I have a post that I republished with minor edits on May 7th. And it's titled The Therapist in Therapy. And I'm talking a little bit fast right now because this is an issue that I give all the fucks about. When I was in grad school, I saw that other programs, not the one that I went to, but other programs were actually requiring psych students to be in therapy themselves. And I was like, oh, like that felt so weird to me. And I was almost grateful that my program didn't require that. And here's why I think that is completely counterproductive. It feeds into this stigma, right? That like we as therapists, as mental health professionals should just be able to do this work on ourselves. And I think that's ridiculous. And I want to give you another analogy, right? Like my dentist isn't less of a dentist because she's got to make her own appointments with a dentist to get her teeth taken care of, right? I would never expect her to do dental work on herself. The surgeon who did my back surgery 4 years ago, I would never expect him to do surgery on himself, right? That sounds ridiculous. That doesn't make them less of a quality medical professional because they can't do that on themselves, right? The same goes for therapists. We are human beings, right? And going to therapy is a sign that we actually believe in the work that we do, right? So I'm going to just kind of quickly go over like some of the reasons why it's actually a good thing if your therapist is in therapy. The very first one I want to talk about is that therapists are at risk for vicarious trauma. Now, what does that mean? I'm not going to give you some textbook definition. In general, it just means that helping people deal with their own shit can transmit onto you, right? It's hard not to bring that stuff home. You can't expect somebody to hear a horrifying story about, something deeply disturbing that you only hear about in horror movies and come home and be fine, right? Not being affected by that means that you're a robot. Doesn't mean that you're a good therapist. The second one is that therapists experience grief and loss too. And I'm especially going to call out that dear friend of mine who just sent me that text message. The example that I use in here was that I really started to go to therapy with the therapist I currently have. I started going to her because my grandmother had just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. This was 2016, the worst year of my life. And I needed somebody to help me process that grief. And I'm calling out that best friend because she was one of those friends who helped me a lot through that. And she was the one, who held me when I lost my grandmother ultimately. But it wasn't just her job as my friend to take care of me. It was also my therapist's job to help me figure out what to do with my grief, right? Because I'll talk about this in another time, but grief is love looking for a place to go, right? And so my going to therapy helped me process that grief in a space so that when I went to work, because I still had to work as a therapist during that time, right? That I could be more emotionally available to my clients. The third one is that therapists have imperfect families too, right? So the example that I use in here on the blog post, and then also I'm looking at my therapy goals that I wrote for myself when I started seeing my therapist 4 years ago, was that I was going through some stuff with my family, especially with my dad. Like we've patched things up now, but shit got hard for a while. And so I needed a space, right? To like talk to somebody who wasn't a coworker, who wasn't my best friend, even though she helped me tremendously, but going to a place where I could really think about what was going on and heal from it and not bring that emotional baggage into my job. And so the last point that I make here, and I'm going to wrap this up in a minute, is that therapists have their own genetic shit too. Like ADHD runs real deep in my family, right? Depression runs really deep in my family. And all of the textbooks in the world, all of the supervision in the world, all of the certifications and trainings in the world don't fix my genetics, right? And so I have my therapist to help me, be with my feelings, but not live in this super dark hole, to help me appreciate the fact that having ADHD gives me so many brilliant opportunities thought-wise and has made me who I am today, and has helped me help other kids with ADHD, but not get to the point where I spin out of control and I get nothing done, right? So those are things that my therapist does for me. And so, I think that I need to be like one more person to really fight this stigma that therapists are supposed to have it all together. And it's not okay to talk about therapists being in therapy. Like, if you are a therapist in training, you need to get your ass in therapy, right? You need to actually practice what you're preaching. You need to be sitting on the other side of the couch, and you need to show the world that you believe in what we do, right? That's your responsibility. Now, if you're a client and you're still feeling a little uneasy, have a conversation, right? Wonder, like, why would you want to sit across the table from somebody who won't go and do it for themselves, right? Anyway, that's all I have to say on this matter. This video is already a little bit longer than I expected. And thanks for listening. Go ahead and check out my blog. I try to write some pretty awesome stuff, and I will see you all next time.